In the early 1990s, Boeing unveiled a plan that looked like a suicide mission. They wanted to fly passengers across the deepest oceans using only 2 engines. But not just any engines, monsters. The General Electric GE90 was so massive that its diameter was the same width as an entire Boeing 737 fuselage. When Airbus saw this, they didn't panic. They laughed. They viewed the 777 as a reckless gamble that physics and regulators would crush. So, Airbus stuck to their guns and built the A340, a glorious 4-engine masterpiece designed to be the undisputed king of long-haul travel. It was safe, it was legal, and it was elegant. But here is what makes no sense. The reckless gamble didn't crash, it conquered the world. Meanwhile, the safe A340 became one of the biggest financial disasters in modern aviation history. Values plummeted so fast that airlines couldn't even give them away, with perfectly good jets being sold for scrap prices just years after leaving the factory. So, how did Airbus misread the future so badly? How did a plane designed to be the safest way to cross the ocean end up as a dead weight that destroyed the philosophy of 4 engines forever? The year is 1991. The aviation world is standing at a crossroads, staring down the barrel of a technological revolution that half the industry refused to believe was coming. For decades, the rules of the sky have been dictated by a single terrifying concept: engine failure. If you are an airline executive in the early 90s, your reality is governed by fear. Fear of mechanical failure over the open ocean, fear of losing an engine when you are thousands of miles from land. This fear was codified into law, creating a regulatory landscape that effectively banned twin-engine jets from flying the most lucrative long-haul routes. Historically, if you wanted to fly passengers across the Atlantic or the Pacific without restrictions, you bought a plane with 4 engines, like the 747, or 3, like the DC-10 or L1011. The reasoning was simple redundancy. If one engine quits, you have 3 left. You are safe. You fly on. But if you are in a twin-engine jet and one fails, you are in an emergency scenario immediately. The math was brutally simple. Losing 25% of your thrust is manageable. Losing 50% is a crisis. Because of this, early regulations known as ETOPS, Extended Range Twin-Engine Operational Performance Standards, kept twin-engine planes on a tight leash. They were forced to stay within 60 minutes of a diversion airport at all times. This rule, known informally as engines turn or passengers swim, meant twin jets had to hug the coastlines in inefficient dogleg patterns. They could not cut straight across the deep ocean. This added time. This added fuel. This burned money. Airbus looked at this landscape and saw a massive opportunity. The market gap was obvious. The legendary Boeing 747 was aging. It was too big for many routes, and airlines were desperate for a modern long-range aircraft that was slightly smaller but just as capable of crossing the globe. Airbus believed that the psychological and regulatory barrier of ETOPS was permanent. They gambled that governments would never allow a twin-engine plane to fly 3, 4, or 5 hours away from the nearest airport. Enter the Airbus Genius strategy. They devised a plan to capture the market with 2 sibling aircraft, the A330 and the A340. It was a brilliant manufacturing play on paper. These 2 planes would share the same fuselage cross-section. They would share the same cockpit. They would share the same systems, but they would have one critical difference. The A330 would be a twin-engine jet for medium routes. The A340 would be the 4-engine heavyweight champion, equipped with a larger wing and structural adaptations to carry more fuel. The A340 was positioned as the premium quad jet. It was the unrestricted master of long-haul operations. Airbus was betting that the restrictions on twins would remain, or that passengers would simply refuse to fly over the ocean on 2 engines. They believed they had checkmated Boeing. They thought they had the market cornered, a twin for the short hops and a quad for the real flying. But here is the twist. While Airbus was perfecting their 4-engine masterpiece, Boeing was preparing a countermove that seemed practically suicidal. Instead of building another quad jet to replace the 747, Boeing doubled down on 2. They announced the 777. The industry skepticism was immediate and brutal. Critics looked at the 777 and called it a risk. They said relying on 2 engines for ultra-long routes was a disaster waiting to happen. To make the 777 work, Boeing needed engines engines that were not just powerful, they had to be monsters. The General Electric GE90s developed for the 777 were comically large. To put that into perspective, the engine alone was nearly as wide as the entire fuselage of a Boeing 737. There is a theory among industry insiders that Airbus didn't just doubt the 777, they fundamentally believed the physics wouldn't scale. They looked at the stress loads on the fan blades of the GE90 and assumed they would shatter. They assumed the reliability would never reach the levels needed for ETOPS certification. In their eyes, the A340 was the only logical choice for global operations. It was the safe choice. It was the reliable choice. But what Airbus failed to see was that the ground beneath them was shifting. They were playing by the rules of 1990, while Boeing was building a plane for the rules of 2000. Think about the magnitude of this miscalculation. Airbus spent billions developing a plane based on a regulation that was about to vanish. This brings us to the regulatory revolution, the trap that snapped shut on the A340. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, engine technology was quietly undergoing a revolution. Jet engines were becoming incredibly reliable. The data showed that the catastrophic failures regulators feared were simply not happening with the frequency they expected. The new generation of high-bypass turbofans was nearly bulletproof. Recognizing this, the authorities began to update the rules. The evolution of ETOPS was slow at first, but then it gained momentum. Twin-engine planes like the Boeing 767 began gaining approvals for 120 and then 180 minutes from the nearest airport. That is 3 hours of flying time on a single engine. Suddenly, the invisible fences in the sky were torn down. The consequences for Airbus were devastating. The A340's key selling point, its unrestricted operations due to 4-engine redundancy, eroded overnight. 4 engines were no longer a legal requirement for long-haul travel. They were no longer a safety advantage. They were just extra weight. They were just extra drag. They were just extra maintenance. As twins proved their reliability, the quad-jet advantage evaporated, but Airbus was not ready to give up. They decided to fight back with sheer size. Airbus launched the A340-600 to go head-to-head with the Boeing 777-300ER. The A340-600 was a beast. At the time, it was the longest commercial plane in the world. It was a slender, elegant tube optimized for extreme range. But elegance does not always equal efficiency. Here is the fatal flaw that no amount of engineering could hide: physics. The A340-600 was inherently heavier than its Boeing rival. It had to carry 4 engines instead of 2. It needed the plumbing, the wiring, and the pylons for 4 engines. It needed a reinforced wing structure to hold 4 engines. All of this added up to dead weight. But the problems went deeper than just weight. The A340 faced a humiliating operational reality known as the hot and high problem. In the world of aviation, taking off from a hot airport or a high-altitude runway is the ultimate test of performance. Air is thinner. Lift is harder to generate. Early variants of the A340, specifically the -200 and -300, became notorious for their struggle in these conditions. They were powered by CFM56 engines, great engines, but originally designed for smaller planes like the 737. On the massive A340, they were pushed to their absolute limit. Pilots joked that the A340 only took off because of the curvature of the Earth. They called them hair dryers. There were stories of A340s taking so long to climb that they would cross entire countries before reaching cruising altitude. But for airlines, it was no joke. On certain routes in hot weather, the A340 could not take off with a full load. Airlines had to leave cargo behind. They had to leave passengers behind. They had to reduce the payload to get the plane off the ground. This contributed to a higher fuel burn relative to the revenue they could generate. Every empty seat was money lost. Every gallon of fuel burned to carry the extra weight of the engines was profit evaporating. However, the hot and high issue was just the tip of the iceberg. The deeper problem was the A340-500. This was the ultra-long range variant, the World Ranger. It was designed to fly farther than anything else on the planet. Singapore Airlines bought them to fly the longest route in the world, Singapore to Newark, non-stop, 18 hours in the air. It sounded like a triumph of engineering, but economically it was a disaster. The A340-500 had to carry so much fuel just to carry the fuel needed for the end of the journey. It was a flying tanker. Toward the end of its service life, Singapore Airlines converted these planes to an all-business class configuration simply because the plane couldn't lift a full load of economy passengers and bags for that distance. When oil prices spiked, the route became a financial black hole. The A340-500 wasn't just burning fuel, it was burning cash. But here is where it gets even crazier. Faced with a physics problem they could not solve, Airbus tried to solve a psychology problem instead. This leads to the marketing desperation. If you traveled in the early 2000s, you might remember the campaign. Backed by high-profile operators like Virgin Atlantic, the slogan was plastered everywhere: 4 engines for long haul. It was a brilliant piece of fear marketing. The psychology was simple. Airbus wanted to tap into the primal fear of passengers. They wanted you to look out the window, see 2 engines on a Boeing, and feel unsafe. They wanted to position twins as the risky budget option for long overwater flights. There is a wild theory that this campaign wasn't just marketing, it was a coordinated attempt to pressure regulatory bodies. The idea was that if they could scare the public enough, the FAA and EASA might halt the expansion of ETOPS ratings. If passengers refused to fly twins, airlines would be forced to buy quads. Virgin Atlantic's Richard Branson, a master of publicity, leaned heavily into this. He had a fleet of A340s, and it was in his interest to make the competition look dangerous. They were trying to convince the world that 4 was a magic number. But the campaign backfired. Airlines are not run by fearful passengers, they are run by accountants, and the accountants were looking at the spreadsheets with horror. The market responded with brutal clarity. Airlines prioritized economics over slogans. The Boeing 777-300ER was a machine built for profit. Estimates showed that the 777 offered 10 to 15% lower fuel burn per seat mile compared to the A340-600. In an industry where margins are razor thin, a 15% difference is not just an advantage, it is a massacre. This leads us to the economic massacre. It wasn't just about fuel, it was about maintenance. A plane with 4 engines has 4 of everything in the propulsion system: 4 fuel pumps, 4 hydraulic interfaces, 4 generators, 4 thrust reversers. When you take an AE40 into the hangar for a C check or a D check, the costs skyrocket. The numbers are staggering. Maintenance costs for 4-engine aircraft are often 20 to 50% higher than for their twin-engine counterparts. Even though the individual engines on an A340 might be smaller and slightly cheaper than the massive GE90s on the 777, the sheer volume of parts and labor required to keep 4 of them running destroys the math. Consider the complexity of the systems. The hydraulic redundancy required for 4 engines involves miles of extra tubing and valves. The avionics required to monitor 4 engines are more complex. Every hour a mechanic spends working on an engine is an hour the plane isn't flying. With 4 engines, the probability of a dispatch delay due to a minor sensor fault doubles compared to a twin. The exodus began. Major carriers started voting with their wallets. Singapore Airlines, one of the most prestigious airlines in the world, phased out their A340s. Air France followed suit. The airlines that had once championed the quadjet were now dumping them in favor of the 777 or newer, more efficient twins. The resale market crashed. An aircraft is an investment meant to last 25 or 30 years, but A340s were being retired after just 20 years of service. Some were grounded even earlier. The pressure of rising fuel prices and the efficiency revolution made them too expensive to fly. By 2013, the value of a used A340 had dropped by 30% in a single decade. In recent years, you could pick up an A340 for anywhere between $6 million and $25 million. That is a fraction of its original list price. This created a bizarre secondary market. While respectable airlines were scrapping them, a shadow market emerged. Some A340s were bought by VIPs or governments of sanctioned nations who needed long-range aircraft but couldn't buy new ones. There are rumors of A340s being bought by shell companies to be used for parts or clandestine operations because they were so cheap and had such long range. But for the mainstream market, they were dead weight. For many of these engineering marvels, there was no second life. There was no cargo conversion program that made financial sense. The only value left was in the parts. They were flown to the desert, places like Victorville or Tarbes in France, stripped of their engines and avionics and chopped up for scrap. It is a haunting image. Brand new interiors, state-of-the-art entertainment systems, barely used airframes, all being crushed by excavators because the engine count was wrong. So how does the story end? Does the hero make a comeback? No. This brings us to the final verdict. In 2011, the inevitable happened. Airbus quietly announced the end of production for the A340. The final tally was 377 deliveries. For a flagship wide-body program, that number is a disappointment. It is a statistic that speaks of a strategy that failed to adapt. To compare, Boeing has delivered over 1,600 777s. The difference is humiliating. The winner was clear. The Boeing 777-300ER became the dominant force in international long-haul travel, the backbone of fleets from Dubai to Dallas. It proved that 2 engines were enough. It proved that efficiency was king. But there is an ultimate twist to this story, an irony that surely stings in the boardrooms of Toulouse. After spending billions trying to eliminate the twin-engine revolution, after marketing campaigns that demonized having only 2 engines, what did Airbus do next? They surrendered. They developed the A350. And what is the A350? It is a twin-engine jet. It is a plane that embraces the exact same philosophy that Boeing championed with the 777. But the road to the A35 was not straight. Initially, Airbus tried to patch the A35 again, calling it the A35, hoping a simple update would suffice. The market laughed at them. The airlines demanded a clean sheet design, a true competitor to the 777 and the 787. With the A350XWB extra-wide body, Airbus finally admitted that Boeing was right. They abandoned the quad-jet architecture for good, joining the efficiency revolution they had tried so hard to stop. There is another layer to this failure, one that touches on the geopolitical ego of Europe versus America. The A340 was meant to be the symbol of European independence in aerospace, a machine that didn't need American engines, mostly, and could fly anywhere. By failing, it forced Airbus to rethink its entire identity. They had to stop designing planes based on what they wanted the world to look like and start designing for what the world actually was. Is this a story of failure? Perhaps, but it is also a lesson. In the high-stakes game of aviation, being right about engineering is not enough. You have to be right about the future. And in the battle for the long-haul skies, the future belonged to the twins. So, what do you think? Was the A340 a misunderstood masterpiece, or was it doomed from the start? And would you still feel safer flying over the ocean with 4 engines? Or has the 777 proven that 2 is the magic number? Check out another video here.